A quick introduction to DLNet for those of you that haven't heard of us before. We are Digital Learning Network. We're an informal network and we explore how digital technologies could be used by the arts, the culture, the heritage sector. And we're a very small committee of volunteers. We're very enthusiastic. We publish articles and events, and yeah, we'd love for you to get involved. So we're going to be popping some chats in some links into the chat box to our Substack channel, to our LinkedIn channel as well. So please do follow along and get involved in the conversation. And what I really personally like about DLNet is that we don't profess to be the experts, we don't profess to have the answers, but we do like to create the space for discussion and for people to bring ideas and questions. So yeah, please do get stuck in on our Substack and LinkedIn. And I'll say this again towards the end, but we are looking for guest articles. So if you're working on a cool digital learning project, and you think you might want to publish an article with us, please do stay in touch. I'm going to put on my other hat now. So, as part of my day job, I work for Historic Royal Palaces, digital learning producer. And at HRP, we have very, very big ambitions around schools and digital outreach. So, we've got a lot coming down the sort of work streams over the next few years. We wanted to get a bit of a sense of what the digital learning landscape looks like across the sector. So we commissioned People Tree Research, and that's Abby Jones, who you can see in Catherine on screen, to kind of look into the sector and produce the report that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to hand over in just a second, but before I do, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat as we go, and then at the end we'll have a little discussion. But apart from that, I'm going to say thank you for all of those who got involved with the research, and thank you all for joining. And I'll hand over to Abby.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosie. Just checking that you can all see that. Is that good?
We can see it. It's not full screen. Oh, it's just gone full screen. Perfect.
Perfect. Okie dokes. Well, welcome. I feel like I'm having a lunchtime briefings. I've just been on one with Teacher Tap, and so now I'm giving one. So it's all the rage. Thank you for coming today. So we are going to be presenting some highlights of the research that we produced for HRP, and some of you took part in. So we will be sending on this deck afterwards with some sort of further and fuller charts with some of the speaker notes in. So just relax. You don't need to take notes. Hopefully, it will all be there. So just really to start, just tell you a little bit about us. We are People Tree. We are a full-service market research agency. And we've been working with HRP since 2013, so quite a long time. And just getting the doorbell noise coming up. And so we are a full service market research agency. We work a lot in the heritage sector, but we also work beyond that as well. Just a selection there of some of the clients that we work with. So I have a background in qualitative research, particularly in the area of children, teenagers, families, and schools. And I have a particular passion of engaging with audiences that don't ordinarily get a voice through research. We like to work alongside our clients rather than for our clients in a sort of a collaborative way of working. We like to move from the what's happening to the so what. So really trying to understand what goes on, but actually what that means for our clients and what they can do with that information, and how it might inform some of their decision making. So that's us. Well, that's me, and that's People Tree. Catherine is the real powerhouse behind the numbers that you'll be seeing today. So Catherine and I have worked together for over 10 years, and she's excellent at bringing the numbers to life in a way that certainly as a qualitative researcher I understand. So hopefully you'll feel the same. But Catherine, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, so I'm Catherine. So I am a mixed methods researcher historically. So I've worked in research for about 20 years, predominantly in the education sector for government and charity sector clients. So much of the work that I do is in schools, is around surveys and interviews with teachers, predominantly around looking at what works in terms of evidence-based practice in the classroom, curriculum development, and increasingly over recent years, exploring how schools are using digital learning formats and also devices to help support teaching and learning in the classroom.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. So just Rosie's given us a little bit of context in terms of this project, but just really to sort of place this research in that context. So HRP is investing in quite a bold redevelopment at the Tower, and that's being supported by the NLHF, and will create new learning centre, digital broadcast studio, and an expanded schools and communities offer. So part of that ambition and linked to HRP's overall strategy is to reach every school in the UK through innovative online, offline and online experiences. And there's a little picture there from some of the strategy documents and that HRP have shared publicly. Where this research comes in really is to consider what that digital offer might look like. So, you know, it's very exciting, but there is also a pressure to get it right. And in that process, HRP really wanted to think long and hard about, well, what could that look like? And the best place to start is to ask colleagues within the industry, you know, what are you doing? How are you feeling? To really think about, actually, we have this opportunity, but how do we maximise it and how do we do it well? And how do we inform that decision making? So that's where a lot of you came in terms of taking part in the survey and the qualitative conversations that I had with many of you. And part of that contract is that we would share, and that's what we're doing today. So it doesn't happen in all of the industries that we work across, but that is a nice part of this process, is we have the opportunity to share some of those insights and hopefully support you maybe in your own decision making as well. So what did we do, the research sample? So we did a sector-wide survey, which we had 30 responses covering 26 organisations. We conducted 11 qualitative interviews. They were meant to be for 45 minutes. Many of them were much longer than that, and really enjoyable. A chance to reflect back on what you're doing, but think more broadly. And I think sometimes having that time to reflect is really helpful. So hopefully also those that didn't take part today gives you that opportunity. We also conducted some desk research, and that desk research really was an opportunity to think about what's going on beyond the UK, what's going on beyond your sector, and actually how can other examples allow HRP to think more broadly, creatively, and I'll be sharing some of the highlights in terms of what we found. It wasn't a large piece of desk research, but it really was just an idea to sort of spark ideas for HRP. So in terms of today's agenda, we've picked 4 areas where we thought that you'd be most interested in. So we're going to look at some trends in terms of what we were hearing from organisations that are approaching digital learning. We're going to look at particularly live lessons versus broadcast. That is an area that was of interest to HRP, but it's quite a dynamic area in terms of post-COVID and how it's changing. So we're going to look at some opinions and potential of that area. Also, we're going to look at why great resources or great digital learning resources often go unseen, and the role of targeted communication, something that we felt came through from a number of you around the fact that actually this is an area where even those that might have fantastic content are missing a trick. And also to look at, you know, what comes next, what are the big questions for the future. So that's really the agenda. And let's start by looking at some of those key trends and how organisations are approaching delivery currently. So I sometimes feel like I should apologise to be mentioning COVID again, but actually it is still relevant, and we still see the ripple effect in terms of how it is affecting schools, but also the impact that it had on your world as well. So COVID changed the world of digital learning and accelerated its role and reputation, especially live lessons and pre-recorded videos. So it accelerated change. Some organisations scaled very quickly, building on existing live digital programmes. Live broadcast, especially for schools, became a default during lockdown, and demand remains as a result of that. And digital learning gained legitimacy. It forced cultural organisations to see digital as a strategic delivery channel, and audiences, especially schools, now expect a hybrid offer. And I'll go on to talk about some of the pressures on schools that also support that dynamic. But this leap wasn't always underpinned by strategy for cultural organisations. So often there was a scramble to deliver without sustainable planning or integration, and often digital teams ended up working reactively, overstretched and under-supported. What is interesting now that we're 5 years on from COVID is the legacy that is left in terms of digital learning is quite different between museum and heritage organisations. And that's what we found was quite interesting from this research, is like we're now a significant period of time on, and actually what have museums and heritage organisations done with that legacy, and what does it look like? So Catherine's now going to take you through some of the stats in terms of some of those trends that we found from the survey.
Thanks, Abby. So up front in the survey, we asked organisations about the type of digital learning formats that they were offering to schools and other learning settings. So as you'll see from this diagram, really, live delivery to individual schools or classes continue to lead the way. 60% of those organisations that responded to the survey told us that they offered live interactive workshops to one class or school. By contrast, there were other broadcast formats that were much less common. So 1 in 5 organisations told us that they offered live broadcast sessions. But what's really clear was that some of those other emerging formats, so virtual reality, came out with only 7% of organisations stating that they offered that as a format. Webinars again came out really much lower, suggesting that across organisations, perhaps new technologies not yet meaningfully embedded within the offer, within the digital learning offer that the organisations are offering. Just move on, Abby, to the next. Thank you. So we asked as well, I suppose, what were the target audiences for the digital learning offer that organisations were providing. And as you'll see clearly from the chart, most organisations seem to be targeting their digital learning offer at Key Stage 2 and or Key Stage 3 students. As you'll see from the chart again, it was much less common for organisations to be targeting that older age group, so much less common for the target audience to be Key Stage 4 pupils. Only 40% said that they were targeting Key Stage 4, 20% said that they were targeting post-16. And again, at that younger age group, less than half of the organisations stated that they were targeting their offer at Key Stage 1 or lower. So definitely the kind of key point seemed to be Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. We also asked about what was the focus of the digital content, and again it's clear from the chart really that the main focus for organisations seem to be around history and science curriculum areas. 80% of organisations said that they were offering history content, 57% said that they were offering science content. Much less common for other subjects like languages, music, citizenship, DT to be a focus for digital learning offers, which perhaps is to be expected from the type of organisations that responded to the survey. So then we asked organisations about what they thought was affecting teachers' choices to decide to engage with their digital learning offer. What seemed to come out really quite clearly was that it was important for the content to have clear curriculum links. 67%, so 2 in 3 of the organisations responded, said that having those clear links to the curriculum within the digital learning offer was really quite important in teachers deciding to engage with it. Other factors that seem to be driving decision making was obviously cost. You'll see from that chart, so over a third of organisation mentioned that it was important that the content was free. 33% mentioned that it was affordable, so cost generally seemed to be driving decision making. And also, I suppose, around logistics and the ability for schools to be able to easily schedule the digital learning offer around what they were already providing in school was mentioned by around a third as well. And obviously, as you'd expect, things around the content being relevant and high quality, that it's engaging and age appropriate, was again seen by organisations as being important for teachers making a decision about whether to engage or not. We also asked about take-up, and we've just pulled out a couple of key points from this question. So the organisations were asked about what they felt the take-up was like by the schools to the different types of digital learning formats and focus that were offered by schools. So I think what you'll see from this chart is that the organisations that responded to the survey seem to think that take-up was particularly good by schools when the content was curriculum and subject focused. They rated it, 19 of the 26 that responded rated that as excellent or good. And again, take-up was reported to be excellent or good for the majority of organisations when that content was linked to important national moments or events, and we'll go on to talk about that further on in the presentation as well. But again, I think this just helps to illustrate what some of the key hooks are for schools when they're choosing to engage with digital learning content or not. I think I'm going to hand over to Abby to take the next one.
Yeah, you are. Thank you, Catherine. That just gives you a flavour of some of the stats that were revealed through the survey. And so I'm just going to go into a little bit more depth in terms of looking at some of the factors that are influencing what organisations are producing in terms of digital learning. And I suppose if we think about the forces that are shaping digital learning, this chart just sort of visualises that. You've obviously got the external educational landscape, and although there are differences between primary and secondaries, some of those factors are the same across that landscape. So curriculum pressures, time constraints, tech limitations, etc. But the internal organisational realities in terms of how organisations are showing up and deciding what to produce in terms of digital learning is different. And that is informed by leadership priorities, team sizes, budget, and where digital learning sits strategically. So the interplay between the external landscape and the internal reality is where digital learning falls, and that reality in terms of what is produced is different. So within this study, we didn't speak to schools, but we are speaking to schools all of the time. And as we know that you are very much in touch with them as well. So we know that schools are under pressure with trips increasingly out of financial reach. Digital learning offers a strong solution, but delivery is constrained by packed timetables and outdated IT systems. So we know that school budgets are squeezed. Many schools, particularly in areas where their birth rate is declining, are in financial budget deficit. And also the reality of having to hire coaches to go on school trips can add thousands. So for some schools, they're just out of reach now, and digital learning removes much of that barrier. As Catherine's already talked about curriculum and classroom needs, we know that teachers demand and expect that any digital learning resources are clearly linked to the curriculum, because that allows them to see where it fits. But also the curriculum timetables are very crowded. So actually for a new asset to land well, it has to offer something extra. So whether that's deeper engagement, offering people something that they wouldn't get elsewhere, or if it's offering a teacher an easy way to deliver something that allows them to match the needs of different learning styles or different abilities. So landing digital learning, there are high expectations coming from schools. There are also technical and infrastructure issues. Many schools are struggling with very old and unreliable and aging hardware, unreliable Wi-Fi. So thinking about that reality is really important when you're developing resources. And also, we know that there are certain industry standards. So the BBC often are seen as the gold standard in terms of the assets that they are producing. And teachers will often go to them because they are a trusted brand and a benchmark for quality. And we also know that teacher recommendations are really, really really important in terms to peer-to-peer influence. And somehow capitalizing on that is quite invaluable. And I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about that later on. So when digital learning is tied to organizational strategy and is actively championed by senior leaders, it gains clarity, commitment, and often unlocks investment in people, skills, and infrastructure. So the pictures here really reflect back the ideal. And some of the conversations we had showed some evidence of this happening, but also almost this is the wish list, that actually if this organizational strategy and digital learning is somehow bringing an element of that to life, everything else flows from that. So investment in people and skills, you get the right roles, the right skills, and less isolation and fragmentation of digital learning. And it also unlocks resources and infrastructure. So it stops being seen as an add-on and becomes part of how learning is delivered within an organization. So this really is the ideal, but the reality is quite different from this. And what we found in the research is a spectrum, really, in terms of people on a journey towards this reality. So this research highlighted the different practices across the sector and how digital learning is perceived, planned, and delivered, often shaped by organizational culture. So I won't go into detail of these quotes, but this is really a continuum that shows, with a lack of strategy and senior support, things can feel quite disjointed. Sometimes they work. It allows for a bit more experimentation, but it also can mean that resources get quickly pulled and things change. We had evidence of some organisations trying to, within their teams, to change culture by building evidence of the profile and the role of digital learning. So a belief in that young people are really very committed to learning and engaging with technology, and that should be an integrated part of learning offers. So winning hearts and minds within organisations to show how things can change and building beyond how they have been. And then right through to organisations where the strategy is supporting that leadership. So like that chart I said before. So that idea that actually things are much easier and everything is working together, and it's shifting people towards a more integrated view of digital learning as part of a suite of learning options within organisations. What was really interesting in terms of taking a snapshot of where people are feeling is that we had quite a deal of feedback around cultural resistance to digital learning is still evident in many museums and cultural organisations. So digital teams describe a lingering reluctance from colleagues wedded to in-person interactions. They describe the need to build confidence across teams and show that digital complements rather than replaces in-person learning. So it certainly feels like you're on the journey, but you're certainly not there yet. So what was interesting is that through the survey and the qualitative discussions, we really felt that there were a number of typologies, and there are probably more. We've got 5 here. But these really just, I think, help to start to tell stories around the state of what's going on at the moment, and showing how different organisations are delivering digital learning and what factors are influencing choices. So I'm going to start from the left here. So shifting giants. These are large, well-known institutions with very strong public profiles. They often have really impressive digital assets on offer, but they're often embedded within their face-to-face visitor experiences. They do have other digital assets available, such as live broadcast, but they tend to be less evolved, and progress can be slow, often held up by institutional scale and size, complex sign-off processes, and the siloed nature of digital teams across the organisations. The next one there is what we're calling mission-focused pragmatists. These teams have a clear commitment to digital learning, often driven by values such as inclusion and access. These organisations often operate under resource constraints, meaning digital work is sustained by a small number of really highly motivated staff. In-person delivery often remains the priority, but digital is used quite strategically to support delivery of organisational strategy and to extend reach. So the next one there is geography-led digital innovators and collaborators. So these are typically smaller, regionally based museums working in places where they don't have the infrastructure or the funding for digital delivery, especially live lessons, can be a bit more limited. So they've joined up and collaborated for live broadcast days where they have guest speakers and experts. They're working collectively together to deliver learning at scale without carrying the full burden of staffing across the year. So I think Morgan is here from the North East Museum, so she's kindly shared a case study which I'll present later about the work that they do around their Hadrian Wall's virtual focus days. So that's when they're collectively working together as a number of museums, and have done so for quite a while now, and offer around about 12 themed live lessons once a year. So they're collaborating because they don't have infrastructure support and are finding a creative way of doing it. We then have creative consolidators. So these organizations use the pandemic as a turning point to really clarify their relationship with digital learning and to embed it more deeply within their their mission. So we found these were often zoos or environmental organizations. They design immersive, interactive experiences rooted in their physical environments. They're quite content-led. They often tell stories that connect audiences to the real settings that they have on offer, and their teams are often usually small, creative, and highly motivated. And then finally, we have established digital deliverers. So these are organisations, I've talked about them before, who already had structural digital learning programs in place before the pandemic. So they had that foundation from which to scale from. Their delivery now is quite consistent, well known, well thought of, though what's interesting is that communication impact measurement is still evolving. And some of them have access to broadcast studios and some of them don't. So it's not always the case that you have to have everything in place to be able to sort of qualify as that type of typology. So there are probably more, but it just gives you a sense of how different organisations within the industry are dealing with the legacy of COVID and also choosing to deliver their live content. So, sorry, I'm just now going to go and focus a little bit now. The second section is live lessons versus broadcast. So live lessons tends to be to one school and broadcast to many. So this was an area that HRP were particularly interested in. And I'm just going to start off by really replaying that spectrum that I've already talked about in terms of organisations' relationship with digital learning, but overlay it now with what that means in terms of live. So you do have from left to right, you've got low use of live, face-to-face is preferred, through to more strategic and embedded, high use of live, and likely to be broadcasting in that area. So across that spectrum, you've got from organisations, we offer online sessions on request, through to those responding to demand that's coming from the market. So market driven, we found a steady increase in take up from schools as they're finding it increasingly difficult to make external visits. So just more of a response there. And then as you move across to the right, you've got those who are beginning to think, actually, we're going to adapt our digital learning approach to shift to broadcast. So we've stopped offering single class, and we're now thinking about the potential reach that broadcast could have in terms of how many schools and people we could reach through to, those that are all have been doing that for a while. So Catherine's now going to take you through some of the quant findings that begin to show you a little bit about the patterns around from that live to one class through to live broadcast.
Thanks, Abby. I'm just going to go through this quite quickly because I'm just aware we've still got quite a lot to get through. So we asked organisations to provide some data about how many live lessons and live broadcast sessions they were providing. So whilst the base numbers were still relatively small, I think it's just helpful for providing an indicative view of how organisations are delivering this type of content. So if we just look at live lessons to one school or class, so on the left-hand side of the slide, just some key things to pull out. So from the organisations that provided the data, those organisations told us that they had on average 47 bookings. On average, they offered 5 different types of sessions to schools or classes. In terms of the platforms they were delivering on, most appeared to be delivering via Zoom, Teams or Google. And then just some qualitative insights just to back up what we were seeing in the quant. In terms of those types of lessons, they, as we've already said, they tended to be curriculum linked. They often appeared to be an extension of face-to-face workshops that were delivered flexibly and were responsive to school requirements and needs. And in terms of who they were felt to be particularly suitable for, there were mentions of them being best suited to SEND students, because some SEND students might find it more difficult to attend face-to-face. And also for those schools that might face some barriers around visiting in person, whether that's location barriers, they're too far away from the place to visit, or those travel costs, general costs that we've already mentioned as being a barrier. In terms of live broadcast sessions, so on the right-hand side of the slide, quite a small number of organisations provided data on this, but as you'll see from those figures, it was quite diverse in terms of the number of live broadcast sessions that they were providing. So average views range from 30 up to 2,500 per session. And then you'll see from the least and most popular, least popular came out as 10 views and up to 9,000. So a real diverse mix in there. Popular platforms that organisations mentioned using, YouTube and Zoom came out at top, really, in terms of that. And again, in terms of the qualitative insights, it seemed that those organisations that were offering live broadcast sessions, it was common for them to kind of coincide these live broadcast sessions with key anniversaries or national events. And they were really found as a format really to help enable mass reach, but with the caveat and the recognition behind that, that comes with a significant amount of planning and communications to be able to do it effectively. And there was examples of these organisations trying to make these sessions feel a bit more personal because they are delivered to such a large number in some instances. So using techniques such as live chat, polls and shout outs to participate in schools and to make them feel a bit more personal. We asked a question about whether they felt uptake to online sessions had changed over the last academic year. As you'll see from the chart, there was mixed feedback really as to whether uptake to online sessions had changed over the last academic year. I think broadly, as you'll see from the chart, the view was that uptake had either decreased or stayed the same for most rather than increased. And perhaps some of the qualitative feedback around that was that perhaps it's offered on request now, much more than it being a priority as it perhaps was during COVID times, and that perhaps others are putting more effort in, which is why some were seeing uptake staying the same, or some saying, and I think that links back to the point that Abby made about whether it was seen as a strategic priority, and also whether there was a capacity within the organisations to be able to continue to offer this format of delivery. Okay, just in terms of this slide, again, we looked at whether they felt uptake had increased or decreased or stayed the same for live broadcasts. Again, the data was quite limited, but it seemed to suggest generally that organisations were reporting growth around live broadcasts, which is positive. And generally those that responded who told us that uptake had increased. Some of the reasons that they mentioned around that was that they were really trying to build momentum around live broadcasts, and that by doing that through websites and making websites more prominent through search engines, strengthening communications, those were some of the strategies that they were really using to try and improve visibility and awareness of the live broadcasts that they were offering.
I think this is a chart that I was going to run through, and I think I'm just conscious of time now, so I'm not going to dwell other than mention a couple of things. So partners and support, some organisations were working with external presenters and producers for their lives to give them extra capacity or production quality. And in terms of space and setup, so lots of evidence that in the absence of broadcast studios, people are having to work in temporary rooms and set up studios on an ad hoc basis, and that actually affects both quality and takes up quite a lot of resource. So there'll be more detail in the report on those areas. So the third section, why great resources go unseen, the role of targeted communication. So I think Catherine's going to take you through initially some of the quant findings in terms of that, and then I'll bring it to life with some case studies.
Yeah, so just quickly on barriers. So we asked organisations about the barriers to delivering their digital learning offer. As you'll see from the chart, awareness. So schools and other learning settings not being aware of what they provide was really key as a barrier to access and engagement. Not having the right contacts or relationships, and I think this came out in the call as well. So understanding who to contact at a school to best market and promote digital learning offers was a barrier to engagement as well. And again, cost, as we've mentioned already, cost came out as quite a key barrier, alongside logistical issues, being able to timetable it around existing school commitments, and also schools' digital infrastructure. We know that schools vary quite considerably in terms of access to devices, how easy or difficult it is for them to be able to set up what's required for digital learning formats. So those kind of were the key barriers that came out around engagement.
So what we found in the qual was trying to unpick why many believe that lack of effective communication leaves digital learning resources underused. And I think if I was to sum it up, it's not supported, it's not supported by comms expertise or just support in terms of getting the message out. And it could do much better. And some degree of frustration that there is a gap between excellent quality and effort in terms of producing great digital learning and it not being known about. And also the unpredictability. Facebook can be both a help and a hindrance. So Facebook suddenly is, if you get a post shared, you get thousands of scores or thousands of visits, but also it can be quite unpredictable in terms of blocking posts. So definitely an area that's evolving and teams would like some more support with. This is the case study that I talked about in terms of Adrian Wall's virtual focus days. So Morgan has shared some of this information with us and is happy for it to be shared on. And really what we take, we can share more around how this programme works in the final report, but it's now going into, I think, its fourth year. This is the collection of smaller museums working together to have focused lives, a suite of options that schools can book into. And over time, and alongside the delivery of these lives, there's one coming up in November, they have thought about communication, and they've thought about how they evaluate. And so they have, over the 4 years, despite limited budgets, achieved the following. So they network through trusted authority hubs, teacher groups, and history organisations to help spread the reach. So you can see on that map there where they are reaching in terms of the schools that are taking part. They've embedded evaluation into their delivery via live polls, surveys, social media feedback, and produces consistent evidence. So they're able to show what they're achieving. And they've used that feedback to improve their practice. They've led to more Q&As, more interactivity, and more varied format. But more significantly, the way that they've used that evidence is to build advocacy. So shifting mindsets that we talked about before in terms of that, the cumulative results is able to prove digital's value and gain senior support. So perhaps if they had senior people saying, is it not going to cannibalise on our, terrible word, but our in-person visits, and actually this evidence by collecting it has been able to show the contrary. So just a really short case study in terms of the way that they've approached their communication by having lots of different methods to reach schools in different communities and build up reputation. So you can see sort of in the Midlands and around Manchester that they've begun to get some traction in terms of getting those hubs. You also heard through the research why language and imagery holds back digital learning. And this is quite interesting. You could do a whole study on the semiotics in terms of language and imagery. So too much focus on tech, not enough on the learning experience. So I think if you think about digital learning, I think where people go first is digital and they miss the learning part. So they think equipment and process. They don't think about the meaningful learning experiences or how it feels. So the framing affects perceived values. But there is some change in terms of the narrative. So moving away from digital, maybe adopting words such as virtual, or simply talking about the setting. So live from the museum, shifting the focus to experience and connection. And supports a more flexible audience-led decision on formats, live, online, hybrid, or in person, not one or the other, or digital learning feeling quite separate. So as I said, there's probably a lot more to this, but this is definitely worth reflecting back because it was quite a core finding. Conscious of time, so we're just now, Catherine, I think, is going to go through some of the barriers, enablers, and big questions for the future from the survey.
Yeah, I'll just go through it quickly. So we asked organisations whether they thought demand over the next 5 to 10 years would increase or decrease. And as you'll see from the chart, there seemed to be generally positivity amongst organisations regarding future demand for digital learning over the next 10 years. 3 in 5 reported that they thought demand would increase or stay the same going forward. I think if we just move on to the next slide. So we asked whether they thought there was anything that could make their organisation's digital learning offer more effective in the future. So future collaboration, as you'll see from the bottom of the chart, really came out as being a potential way of strengthening their offer going forward. Co-design again came out top with nearly 3/4 of the organisations mentioning that, and that was co-design with learning settings and also co-design with end users. And also, as you'd perhaps expect, increased marketing and promotion were also viewed as a key way in which digital learning offers could be strengthened. I'm probably going to miss out on these because I think we've touched on them already, Abby, but we just had an open question, and we can provide some more detail when we send it through. We just had some open questions in there about how organisations should be evolving and also what challenges they think that we face. But I think we've probably touched on some of those already.
Okay, so this is the penultimate slide, and I won't spend too much time on this. It's just looking further afield. I think sometimes when you're focused on an issue or a topic, it's useful to look outside of the box. And so we did that by doing a piece of desk research. I've mentioned the BBC. We've collected them into themes here: curriculum-linked digital outreach at scale, so Durham Museum in the US, reaching beyond its borders to international audiences, but still curriculum linked. AI-powered testimony and immersive dialogue from the Holocaust Education Trust, so working in schools, but allowing technology to bring the past to life in a way that really sort of plays to strong storytelling. Cultural connection and identity, so some really interesting things going on in Australia, in Aboriginal communities presenting their culture, the Burragan digital learning there, blended digital and exhibitions from the Norman Rockwell Museum, and then the Global Science Opera, so international projects via schools co-creating content, and then immersive heritage learning with SciArc. So there's a lot more detail that we can give you, but again, just starting to think about where do you get inspiration from, and where do you cast your eyes in terms of what's happening and what is possible. So just for some concluding thoughts, I suppose our big point to share with you is that digital learning is a mixed and evolving landscape with clear demand but variable delivery. So from our perspective and from this research, it's not yet widespread for UK museums and heritage organisations to offer digital learning that is integrated, strategic or scaled. There feels that there's space in the market to create something distinctive, grounded in place, strategically led and capable of reaching many schools and more broadly communities from SEND to homeschools with clarity and purpose. And we can give more detail on here, but how digital learning teams are meeting core challenges. So some of those core challenges around senior belief in the role and impact of digital learning, a lot of work done in terms of collecting evidence to show the opposite of that and how it can actually deliver strategic organisational goals. Limited capacity and overstretched teams holds back delivery, how creativity and working collectively across institutions can actually deal with that. Poor access to kit and skills reduces production values. Some are therefore training people beyond digital learning to deliver, and also working with other organisations to help them to fill those gaps. Fragmented digital delivery across departments limits impacts. That feels like it's a work in progress, but people are aware that that actually does affect the effectiveness of what they can deliver. Strong content is often invisible to teachers. We've talked about that. And digital content, this final point I think is an interesting one. Digital content can lose authenticity when detached from place. And I suppose that was a message to HLP, particularly around they're going to have a broadcast studio, is that actually it's really important to not lose sight of the authentic place and the stories and actually using that place in terms of content. So whether that's creating pre-filmed video to ensure that actually broadcasts don't feel sterile and detached from the assets and the USP that organisations have. So that's a whistle-stop tour. We've gone over time. I will stop the share and look forward to some questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Abby and Catherine. There's already loads of questions in the chat, so we'll go through them in the order that they came in. But just before we do, I know some of you are going to probably have to drop off. Please do stay in touch with DLNet. I've popped some links in the chat box. We're going to have more and more content coming out via DLNet. We're looking for people to help us with guest articles, so please do get in touch if you've got anything that you're working on you'd like to share. And we've got a new event on the 20th of November. It's a campfire event, a bit like a show and tell. We want people to bring questions, ideas, for us to just have a bit of a chat around our digital learning programs, things we need help on. So 20th of November, subscribe to Substack, and we'll post out more information about that. But let me get back into the questions. I'm just scrolling back up because I saw there was quite an early one from Tali, who said, do you have any information about who responded to the call out? Geographic spread, national independent civic museums, art galleries, faith-based heritage? What was the kind of spread?
We definitely have that, Catherine, don't we? We just didn't include it in that deck. We can put it, if it's helpful, in the final deck that we send out. That's fine, isn't it, Rosie?
Yeah, I think that'll be
Yeah.
absolutely fine. Yeah, great. So yeah, do stay in touch with DLNet if you'd like to sort of find out how to receive those notes. So I think the next question was from Sophie. I hope I'm not missing anyone here. Hi, Sophie. I was wondering if there was any evidence from this research about average costs that teachers were willing to pay for digital sessions.
Yeah, it's not something we explored, is it? I don't think, Abby.
No, but I have an instinctive answer to it, which is they'd like it to be free.
Yeah.
And I think from other research that we've done, the issue is that even if it's a small cost, there's an administrative cost to getting that organised. And so if you can remove those barriers for teachers who are time poor and stressed, then everything flows. So actually, sometimes it's not necessarily the actual, if it's only a small amount, it's the administrative barrier that it adds in terms of that equation.
Yeah, I have some personal thoughts on that follow a very similar thing. If anyone else has any experience with that, but please do pop it in the chat. We had a very similar thing at Historic Royal Palaces recently where our bookings for those sorts of sessions were low. We removed the cost and lo and behold, the bookings were fully booked within a couple of days. So I think it was that administrative part that was being tricky. Great, thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Abby, as well. Co-design, this one is next from Claire. Co-design now means many things to many people. What does it mean in this context, please?
So I think that's referring to one of the quant charts, isn't it, in terms of what they were saying. Can you just remind me, Catherine, what the context was there?
Yeah, I'm just looking. It was the point about how digital learning offers could be strengthened in the future. And it mentioned co-design with with organisations and end users. Obviously, we weren't more specific in the survey. We didn't explain what co-design meant. I don't know whether we explored it in the qual at all, Abby, but I think we saw it as a way of co-design in terms of working together to develop the content.
Yeah, and I think I can speak from, there's another strand to this project where we conducted some work with young people around skills development, and actually what co-design meant to them is listening to what their needs are and understanding their pressures and realities. And actually what co-design means, I think more broadly, is actually speaking to all types of young people and not those that typically are confident to get involved with museums and heritage sites, which I just think are a small subset of young people. And I think from that other work that we've done with HRP is actually thinking about ways that organisations can genuinely engage with all types of young people so their voices are heard, so that co-creation becomes really co-created and not just co-created by those young people who are confident enough to take part. So thinking about actually the medium in which you co-design and how you do that, I think is really important. But that sort of slightly goes beyond this project, but just from our experience.
Thank you. And I should say, if I'm not capturing your questions properly, if I've not quite got them, please do feel to put your hand up. I'm sure we can unmute you if you can't unmute yourself, and we'll get to the bottom of it. The next one that I've got on my list here is, I think, from Eleanor. Is there any insight into why the majority of organisations are targeting primary rather than secondary? Is it the fact that their existing programme is already more primary, or is there logistical or other reasons why that might be?
Hello, Eleanor. I think that it is a number of factors. I think Key Stage 2 children are able to concentrate. So it's a sweet spot, really. It's still primary, so logistically you've got one class and you've got a collection of children who can sit for an hour and concentrate. And so I suspect over time what's happened is that organisations have just realised that they're getting uptake at that age, and therefore actually other offers have fallen away and they've just focused on Key Stage 2 because it's being successful. And I suppose if you've got something that's successful and it's not broken, you don't try and fix it, but then actually maybe you don't expand beyond that remit. And I think there probably is definitely opportunity, but I suspect the model is different. the model would be different at Key Stage 1, but I also think the model is different with older teenagers who actually are more independent learners and maybe less wedded to accessing this stuff through schools and maybe more independently. So I think a lot more thinking has to be done in terms of how you reach, because I think the model is probably different. I think the model is working for Key Stage 2. That's why I think we're seeing that. And I think you have something left over in Key Stage 3 that, you know, that, and then by Key Stage 4 you've lost them and exams are coming in. So I just think it's going to take thinking in a different way to get that. And maybe you won't see, maybe Key Stage, maybe when we come back in 5 years' time and do the study, you'll still see that Key Stage 2 is the sweet spot, but actually you might see success with some of those other ages, but I think it's doing it differently.
I imagine the secondary school timetable might have something to do with that as well, for sure. Great, I've sort of lost my place in the questions. Let's bear with me a second. There's so many coming in. So we had Eleanor, another one from Eleanor. Did we see anything about school or council firewall issues? So Eleanor's been looking at a virtual visit offer via a specialist platform, but they're finding that there's lots of blockages and firewalls in the place. Like, is Zoom and Teams the kind of optimal method?
I think we definitely had that Zoom seemed to be king in this area in terms of coming through as the sort of preferred platform, and there are other platforms there. I think firewalls, we didn't hear it from this, but I've heard it in others, is can be a real issue for schools.
Yeah, I think from other research, definitely from other research I've done in EdTech generally, firewalls can be a massive issue, particularly sometimes if schools don't have like a dedicated IT person to be able to deal with that. That's definitely where a barrier hits, whereas secondary schools are often much more equipped to be able to change systems and to allow access. It's definitely more difficult, I think, at a primary level.
Yeah, I think Teacher Tap stats in terms of IT support show a real difference between primary and secondary, which would reflect that whole difference.
I think we have 2 questions left and 2 minutes left, so let's see if we can do it. So the next one is from Fenella, who asks, are there any insight from organisations about how they think teachers are using AI and how this might be impacting interest in digital resources provided by heritage culture?
Hello, Fenella. Yes, I think it came through in the quant. I feel like this is just like quite a dynamic area, and it almost changes day to day in terms of what's happening with AI. I think we definitely had a sense that AI is going to feature in digital learning going forward, but not a real sense of how, but just a real gut instinct that it will. I think we know from stats coming through again from Teacher Tap that AI is really being used a lot by teachers and also by pupils, and it's on the rise. And I think schools, I'm a governor at a local school in Brighton and Hove, and I know that schools are really on the back foot in knowing what infrastructure and how to support their staff and using it. I suspect it's going under the radar. I think places like Surrey, I think as a council, have a strategy in terms of AI. Brighton and Hove, for instance, don't. And so I think there's a knowledge that there is going to be a role, but there's almost a need to really grasp what that might look like and how it might evolve, both from a school perspective, but both in terms of your organisation as well. So, Vanilla, I'm not sure if I quite answered that question, but like, watch this space. I think is the space.
Absolutely. I think it's a hot topic for us at DLNet as well. So yeah, please do watch this space. And if you've got any thoughts and ideas, we'd love to help share them with our wider network. Okay, the last one we're going to squeeze in is from Ed. Hi, Ed. So were organisations adopting a diverse mix of digital learning formats, or were they focusing on a single or limited range of formats?
I think the answer to that, Ed, hello Ed, is that it depends. I think in some of those more resource restricted organisations that were trying to think pragmatically about how they delivered were much more focused But then other organisations that maybe had a heritage of having done more and are now are in a position of shift, had some stuff that was visual and available, but actually wasn't supported and promoted. So again, I think it showed that it felt quite dynamic. It felt quite different. It felt, those different typologies that we developed really did depict the different voices that we were hearing. So I think it's really varied. And I think to the last slide that we gave is that there is a real opportunity to really seize something in this space, but we realise for all the factors that we discussed that that's not always the easiest thing to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Abby and Catherine. And also thank you for everyone who actually took part in the research. Obviously, it wouldn't exist without you. So we really, really appreciate it. We appreciate you coming along today too. You can see that Lucy Ann, who is our chair of DLNet, has been popping messages in the chat. So if you would like to get involved, if you would like to contribute a guest article, we would absolutely love that. You can get Lucy's email from the chat box there. We will be working out how we're going to distribute the slides and the notes. So again, just stay in touch with DLNet and we will work out how to do that and share that. But apart from that, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your slightly grey afternoon, and we'll see you hopefully in November for our next event, November the 20th. See you then.